Bovona tight-to-shaft tracheostomy tubes, also known as the TTS cuff. The Bovona tight-to-shaft tracheostomy tube is a high-pressure cuff. This high-pressure, low-volume cuff, when deflated, helps to improve translaryngeal airflow, facilitates voice restoration during spontaneous breathing trials, and helps to eliminate the need for fenestrated tubes. The most important clinical consideration of TTS tracheostomy tubes is the cuff-to-tracheal wall pressure. Cuff pressure does not equal cuff-to-tracheal wall pressure when using the TTS cuff. Cuff pressure equals cuff-to-tracheal wall pressure only if the cuff material is not stretched. When using high-volume, low-pressure cuffs, cuff pressure equals cuff-to-tracheal wall pressure provided the appropriate size tube is used and the cuff is not inflated beyond the point of the cuff material stretching. Just because the cuff feels tight does not mean the cuff is exerting excess cuff-to-tracheal wall pressure. High-volume, low-pressure cuffs can easily become high-pressure cuffs if the tube is too small for an adult patient, or if the cuff has a less than 27 mm cuff resting diameter and is inflated beyond this dimension prior to coming in contact with the tracheal wall. The TTS cuff promotes patient safety provided it is inflated using one of the two distinct recommended inflation techniques. The first is minimal occlusive volume, while auscultating the patient's neck and listening to leak during inspiratory phase of mechanical ventilation. Slowly inject water until the leak disappears during the peak of inspiratory phase. You are putting just enough volume of water in the cuff to provide a just seal against the tracheal wall to help prevent leaks. The second technique is the minimal leak technique. This technique is listening until there is a slight leak during the peak of the inspiratory phase. Allowing a slight leak around the cuff accounts for the size of the tube being used, the size of the patient's trachea, and helps to prevent excessive cuff-to-tracheal wall pressure. There is no magic number or volume of sterile water you need to achieve the minimum occlusive volume or the minimal leak technique. In both techniques, it is important to document the volume of water required to achieve the desired results. TTS cuffs are gas permeable, and air will diffuse out of the cuff over a period of time. Sterile water promotes the stability of cuff volumes for longer periods of inflation. Do not use normal saline, even though we recommended the use of sterile normal saline in the past. It is not recommended now because we found the salinity in the saline will increase and may cause salt crystallization. Crystallized salt may result in obstruction in the airway line and may damage the one-way valve in the pilot balloon. Using sterile water helps to eliminate the need for monitoring cuff pressure. Monitoring cuff pressures is a false sense of security. All cuff volumes, either of air or water, must always be measured and recorded. Cuff volume changes are the most accurate determination of tracheal changes. It is recommended that you have a 10 milliliter syringe of sterile water readily available when the tracheostomy tube is introduced to the patient. The integrity of the TTS cuff will need to be checked prior to insertion. Using a syringe, it is recommended that the cuff be inflated using 10 milliliters of air. Due to the nature of the silicone cuff touching the silicone tube and the environmental conditions during storage, the cuff may stick to the tube and not inflate properly. Should this occur, it is recommended that the cuff be massaged to free it from the tube. This will enable the cuff to inflate fully and symmetrically. The TTS cuff may not be a good option for patients with high peak airway pressures or high levels of PEEP during mechanical ventilation. In conclusion, it is most important to remember the TTS cuffs should be inflated using only sterile water to use the proper technique, as opposed to trying to define a cuff volume that works for all patients, and carefully follow the guidelines for one of the two cuff inflation techniques. The minimal occlusive volume or the minimal leak techniques are recommended for the tight-to-the-shaft cuff. One final and important recommendation is to massage the TTS cuff prior to insertion. For more information, contact Smith's Medical at 800-258-5361 in the U.S. or 214-618-0218 and visit www.smiths-medical.com.